Some men collected trouble the way gulls collected scraps, here and there, until a storm came and everything scattered. Elias Marlowe had not been one of them. For 34 years he had made a deliberate life of avoidance, a log cabin nailed to a ridge, trap lines like a map only he could read, and a silence as dependable as the seasons. Up in the pines, the world reduced to weather and animal signs. There was no small talk, no obligations, no messy human expectations. That was before Maeve Calder stepped down from the stagecoach in Copper Hollow, with a battered satchel and a mouth that could split a log. Ruth, his sister, had answered an advertisement as if it were a dare. She signed for Elias without asking, boxed the idea into a legal envelope, and posted it. "You won't live forever on the wind," she'd told him, hands on hips, as if the whole world were only a misbehaving child. Time you stopped hiding and started living. So Elias stood at the coach stop that October evening, feeling more like a man called to account than a husband-to-be. The air tasted of wood smoke and coming snow. He'd rather have been setting snares or splitting kindling, but Ruth had insisted on a proper meeting. Passengers clambered down, a drummer with a sample case, 2 ranch hands Elias knew by face, a gray-haired woman with a carpet bag, a young mother with an infant who screamed like the world was ending. Elias let himself hope Maeve might not have come. Maybe she had changed her mind between Missouri and the Montana foothills. The last person to step from the coach was small in stature, wrapped in travel-stained brown, a sensible hat flattened by miles of road. But her eyes were a different story, green and exacting, the color of new grass and edged like flint. She took in the platform, the buildings, Elias's face, as though cataloging every escape route. "You must be Elias Marlowe," she said, stepping toward him with the confidence of someone who had never been prone to begging. Elias removed his hat, unsure whether civility or bluntness would serve him best. "Mr. Marlowe is fine," he said. "Maeve Calder," she returned, slinging her satchel over one shoulder. "Your sister wrote that I should come, not for roses and poetry. I'm here for a home that's practical." She looked him over in a single sweep, taller than she'd expected, broader than the letters had suggested. "You'll do." People were usually nervous around him, or theatrical. Maeve was an odd combination of unblinking appraisal and practical humor. "Are we going to stand here all night?" she asked. "Or will you show me the place that got me summoned?" The wagon ride to his homestead took 2 hours. Maeve sat beside him, quieter than Elias had expected, attentive to the world sliding by, stands of pine, the trail cut out of stone, the mountains turning purple in the dusk. She asked practical questions, and when she opened her satchel to check a neat roll of bandages and wrapped herbs, Elias realized she carried more than a few changes of clothing. "You know about medicine?" he asked. "Old habits," she said. "My ma took care of most of the town. I learned." The cabin was everything Elias had built. 3 summers of backbreaking, patient labor, logs fitted tight, a stone chimney that drew properly, the kind of glass in the windows he had hauled up piece by piece from town. It was not a manor, but it would keep a person safe. Maeve surveyed it with the same practical eye she treated life with. "Smaller than I expected," she said. "Big enough for what I need." "What you need," Elias repeated. She smiled once. "You built it for you. Now there are 2 of us. We'll make it function for both." Their marriage had been legal, if not theatrical. Ruth had stood in for Elias in Missouri, and a paper had been signed. But a legal ceremony and a lived one are different animals. Maeve wanted terms. "I didn't come here looking for romance," she said plainly. "I can cook, mend, work. I expect food, shelter, some safety. I won't be anybody's servant, and I'll not pretend a fairy tale." Elias thought the arrangement straightforward. He'd met arrangements that were stiffer and neater. He'd not met a woman who could rebuff him with practicality and not ruffle the air. The first week became a contest of small dominions. Maeve reorganized things. She moved the coffee tin, set the tools in order that made sense to her, measured where a proper cloth should hang. Elias watched, his jaw tightening with each change. He bristled at the suggestion that his life could be improved by neatness and a store of flour not tasted in decades. "You'll crack your teeth if you keep grinding them like that," Maeve observed, placing a stack of golden flapjacks in front of him. She poured strong coffee, not the mud they'd both endured, and Elias discovered that what she made was better than he had expected. To admit it would have been surrender. He said instead, "It's edible." She laughed, water over pebbles. An easy sound that made him want to be offended and also softened him. The laugh was a first wedge in the cabin's defenses. Elias had lived by straight rules: read nature, read tracks, face a storm rather than beg for its mercy. Reading people had always been a rougher language. He had learned silence from a taciturn father who taught him with hands rather than adjectives. With Maeve, he found contradictions. A refined vocabulary paired with rough clothing, soft hands that mended with skill, and an intensity that made it hard to guess which way she would tilt at any given hour. They negotiated the ordinary. Maeve traded mending for milk from Amos Pike down the road, and accepted an invitation for Sunday dinner in a way that made Elias feel like someone receding from habit. "We're married," she said. "We're a unit now. You will make calls. You will go with me, and you will meet people." That single sentence pushed Elias harder than any winter. He had faced blizzards and charged bears. The accusation that he was a coward wounded him with the blunt force of someone who had not been understood. They argued, they reconciled. Each sharp exchange revealed a softer edge. She needed to build, to be useful beyond keeping house. He needed the solitude he had built his skin around. Eventually, they made room for one another's needs. Maeve began going to town. Elias's chest tightened at the thought of her among people who could gossip or worse. Remind her of the life she'd fled. The truth was uglier. He worried she would leave. He was afraid of being used and discarded like a tool. Yet when he offered to accompany her, both their betrothed defense systems relaxed. In Copper Hollow, Maeve moved like someone who belonged to the world. She charmed Orrin McCall, the general store owner, negotiated prices with a sharp eye, and traded eggs for credit to order unfamiliar spices. Elias watched, astonished. People in town smiled at her the way travelers smile at good luck, warm and generous. "You're a fortunate man," Orrin told Elias as they loaded goods into the wagon. Elias listened to the compliment like he was under someone else's spell. The idea of Maeve as a treasure lodged in his mind like a new tool, useful, potentially profitable, something to be stewarded rather than feared. She returned with plans and lists. She started helping at Martha Rigsby's boarding house twice a week, doing washing and mending in exchange for coin and food. Her days there became a way to stitch herself into community. She taught a miner's child to read, and when an old prospector named Harlan Briggs complained of arthritis, she mixed an old remedy that eased his pain. Word spread in a town that devoured news the way winter devours wood. The Marlowes, for that is what Elias and Maeve became, were suddenly a place where practical skill and honest trade met. The real turning point came on a night when Ethan Pike came pounding at Elias's door, breath rasped by fear. His boy, Tommy, had fallen through thin ice at Miller's Pond and did not warm. Elias and Maeve rode to the Pike cabin in a rush of hooves and panic. Together, they fought the clock. Maeve took command like she had been born to it, warming stones, directing hands, administering tinctures, and a steady swaddle of care. For hours, they worked as a single unit. The boy's shivering finally gave way to heat. Color crept back to his cheeks. When the crisis lifted and they rode home, silence between them was not emptiness, but something solid, the knowledge that, when needed, they would act as one. That night's simple "thank you" from Elias left a mark. Maeve had not hesitated. He had not known he would be proud of her, in a way that sat next to tenderness as though it had always belonged there. Their partnership had moved beyond convenience. In the long months, they adjusted. Maeve's hands built more than folded shirts. Her mind sketched plans. She saw potential in the valley where Elias saw only familiar trails. "Furs are fetching better prices if prepared right," she said one evening, fingers smudged with grease as she worked a beaver pelt. "There's no dairy within 50 miles. Butter and cheese would sell." Elias resisted at first. He trapped for himself, and it had always been enough. But she had willingness and the sort of focus that made small changes snowball. She taught herself techniques, some from books she had ordered to be sent to Martha Rigsby, some from the old women she met in Copper Hollow. She began holding informal lessons, charging a few coins and teaching how to prepare pelts and cure hides. The neighbors came and began to talk about the Marlowe house. Their work complemented each other. Elias provided the trappings and craft, Maeve provided presentation, market, and the relationships. Money that had once dribbled into Elias's life like an afterthought began to be deliberate. They could buy better feed, patch the barn more firmly, order special tools. They planned slowly, in the long way of people who had to stretch each season into the next. Maeve's practical ambitions, to expand, to try raising a few head of cattle, were not dreams of grandeur so much as plans of methodical work. When Maeve finally told Elias the full truth of why she had answered Ruth's ad, the confession landed with a sharp, honest weight. She had been running from a life capped by small cruelties and a bitter scandal she refused to be defined by. James Milford, a man she had married because men like him were expected, had been found in a dishonorable situation. The scandal destroyed reputation and savings alike. Maeve had stayed, tried to rebuild, but each day's pity tightened like a noose. She had originally intended to use the marriage as a stepping stone, long enough to gain distance, then dissolve and move on. But Elias was not what she had expected. He had no habit of duplicity. He offered no pretenses. He was stubborn, yes, but he matched that with a kind of integrity that disarmed her. Elias could have been incensed. He could have walked away. Instead, the truth rearranged the terms of their relationship. "I'll have you," he said simply. It was a measured acceptance of both her past and the present. Not a naive forgiveness, but a decision to build with the materials offered. They sealed the new covenant with ordinary things. A shared bottle of good whiskey Maeve had purchased in town, cinnamon rolls notched by Dawn's oven, long conversations that threaded plans across the table. Where once Elias's silence had been armor, it became a comfortable companion. Where Maeve's speech had been weaponized, it became the means to persuade and plan. Winter came hard, the snow closed, the world, but the cabin grew warmer still as the two became craftsmen of a common life. Maeve took the pelts Elias trapped and turned them into something finer. Orrin McCall paid premium prices. She taught classes and patched a dozen things around the valley. The income piled, not grandly but reliably. Elias's stubbornness, the very trait that had turned him from town to tree line, proved a kind of ballast. When plans needed follow-through, he was there day after day, halting and true. They saved and planned. The idea of cattle that had once been a wild ambition became plausible. One evening in spring, Maeve announced she was with child. Elias sat very still, feeling a kind of terror and joy that compressed him, and then released him like a bell. It was the most significant responsibility he had ever accepted with open hands. "I feel like the luckiest man in the territory," he said at last, and in saying it, he made a promise both to the future and to the woman whose eyes had once been calculators and were now, often, full of soft light. They bought a dozen head of breeding stock in August and became apprentices to a new kind of labor. Together, they built pens, learned rotational grazing, preserved meats and cheeses, and continued to refine fur preparation into a local craft. Maeve's network became as valuable as the cattle. Customers came because she made them feel known, because she stitched together services that respected their needs. People preferred to buy where they were treated with honesty. Reputation, Maeve always reminded Elias, is currency. The baby arrived on a cold December morning before the midwife could get to the cabin. She came quick and profound, a daughter with her mother's green eyes and a stubborn chin that made Elias's breath catch. Maeve named her Ruth, after the very sister who had forced this unlikely course into being. To Elias, who once considered family a complication, the little girl was proof that his life had widened without losing its center. Years stretched kindly, the pasture fattened, the smokehouse filled, their ledger filled with steady entries. The Marlowe name became known across the valley for fair deals, thoughtful remedies, and pelts prepared with a care that paid off in city markets. Maeve's classes expanded to include butter and cheese preparation. Young women from the mining camps came to learn. Elias found himself walking into town, not because he had to, but because he wanted to speak with Orrin about supplies, to listen to a neighbor's trouble, to watch Ruth learn to read on Maeve's lap. His hermit shell had not been lost so much as reshaped. He still loved the mountain's quiet, but it no longer ruled him. On soft evenings, they sat on the porch and watched the hillside fold gold under the sun. Businesses still came in wagons, customers who wanted fair prices and honest goods. They had built more than a homestead. They had constructed a life that could sustain and more than themselves. They built a legacy, piece by piece, A barn for August rains, a room for Ruth's school books, a pantry full of flour that did not taste like crude stone. One night, as the last wagon rattled off down the road and the fire in the hearth burned low, Elias turned to Maeve and let himself ask the bluntest of questions. "Do you ever regret staying?" he asked. Maeve's face softened. "Never," she said. "This is everything I never knew I wanted. Even the stubborn parts of you helped build it, even Ruth's stubbornness." She kissed him then, a quick, sure arc that felt like a promise and a beginning. They had arrived at something neither had planned, a marriage that had started as convenience and grown into devotion. They had taken practical pieces, a cabin, a satchel of herbs, a legal paper filed by a meddling sister, and turned them into a home, a community, and an enterprise that would outlast both of them.